My boyfriend asked me to shave my head in solidarity of his sister's cancer. When I did, he called me a bald freak and dumped me. So I showed up to his fundraiser and made him tell everyone why we're not together anymore. 7 months ago, my boyfriend's sister Sable was diagnosed with stage 4 lymphoma. Her odds weren't good, and within 6 weeks her hair was already falling out. We were at her favorite seafood restaurant celebrating her 13th birthday, and she just looked so sad, sighing about how she feels like a monster, how kids at school are bullying her for her lack of hair. I was about to tell her she was the most beautiful girl regardless when suddenly my boyfriend Cain clinked his glass. "I have an announcement to make," he said, staring at Sable, then back at me. "Sable, I know how alone you feel because of your hair." He then turned to me. "That's why my lovely girlfriend here has decided to shave her head bald, to show you that you're not alone." Sable's face instantly lit up while mine went ghost white. "Really? You'll shave your head for me?" Sable asked excitedly. Her eyes looked happier than I'd seen since the diagnosis. I stared at her, not knowing what to say. I'd never even hinted at shaving my head. This was the first time Cain had ever brought it up. Before I could respond, Cain cut in. "Yes, really. She told me all about how she can't wait until her head is smooth as a bowling ball." Sable laughed at his joke. The mom stretched her hand out to hold mine across the table. The dad walked over and pulled me into a hug. The table next to us turned to me and gave me encouraging looks. The waiter even brought us free dessert. The rest of the night was spent talking about how brave and amazing I was, with Sable calling me her hero and telling me I was giving her the strength to continue her battle. I drove home that night realizing I couldn't say no, not after seeing how happy it made her. Over the next few weeks, I prepared myself mentally. Cain kept bringing it up in front of his family. Every dinner, every hospital visit, he'd mention it. "My girlfriend is so strong." His parents would tear up and Sable would smile. I felt trapped but committed. The day finally came. I went to the salon alone because Cain said he had work. I sat in that chair and watched chunks of my hair fall to the floor. The stylist kept asking if I was okay, and I kept saying yes, even though my hands were shaking and I was trying not to cry. When she finished, I looked in the mirror. I looked so different. But I thought about Sable and how this would make her feel less alone. I drove straight to Cain's house to show him. I was nervous but also kind of proud. I'd done something really hard for someone I cared about. I knocked on his door, and when he opened it, his face went completely white. "What did you do?" he said, staring at me like I was a stranger. "I shaved my head. For Sable. Like you announced at her birthday." His eyes got wide. "I thought we were just talking about it. Like I'd mention it to make her feel good but not actually do it." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You announced it in front of her entire family. You've been telling everyone for weeks." "Yeah, but I didn't think you'd actually go through with it." He stepped back from me like I was contagious. "You look like a freak. I can't date someone who looks like that. We're done." He shut the door in my face. I stood there on his porch, bald, completely shocked and alone. I got in my car and cried for an hour. 3 days later, I got a text from Sable. "Hey, I heard what my brother did. I'm so sorry." We got to talking, and she mentioned a fundraiser gala they were having for Sable this Saturday. "There's gonna be like 200 people. Cain's giving a speech. Wanna come? Show everyone what he did." I almost said no. I didn't want to face him. But Sable hyped me up. She called me the sister she never had. My brother or not, Cain is trash. And trash needs to be dealt with. So I texted back, "I'll be there." Saturday night arrived. I put on a nice dress and walked in with my head held high. Cain saw me immediately from across the room. He looked panicked and rushed over. "What are you doing here? You need to leave." Before I could even answer, an older woman approached us with a warm smile. "Oh my goodness, you must be Cain's girlfriend. What you did, shaving your head for Sable, that's absolutely beautiful. You're so brave." I looked at Cain, then back at her. "Oh, we're not together anymore. Cain called me a bald freak for doing this and broke up with me. I'm here just for Sable." The woman's smile vanished. She stared at Cain with disgust and walked away without another word. This happened over and over throughout the night. Person after person came up, and every single time I calmly explained what Cain had said. I watched the words spread like wildfire. People started avoiding Cain, giving him dirty looks, whispering. Then came his speech. He got on stage to thank everyone for supporting his family through Sable's treatment. The room was ice cold. Literally nobody clapped. After his awkward speech, the event organizer took the microphone. "We have wonderful news. The anonymous donor who has been funding Sable's treatment since she was first diagnosed has come forward." My parents stood up from their table in the very back. They stared directly at Cain. My father took the stand. "I would like to say a few words to Cain. Can you please come on stage?" Cain stood frozen for a second before his legs started moving toward the stage. His face had gone pale white, and I could see his hands shaking at his sides. My father stayed perfectly still at the microphone, waiting, his expression calm, but his eyes locked on Cain like he was studying him. I felt my stomach twist into knots because, yes, I wanted people to know what Cain did, but watching it happen in front of 200 people suddenly felt too big, too public, too real. Sable's hand found mine under the table and squeezed tight. I glanced at her and she was sitting up straight, her bald head catching the ballroom lights, and she gave me a small nod like she was telling me it was okay. Cain climbed the 3 steps to the stage and stood about 5 feet from my father. The whole room had gone completely silent. You could hear the air conditioning humming. My father leaned into the microphone and his voice came out steady and clear. He said that he and my mother chose to help Sable without anyone knowing their names, because 15 years ago they lost their own son to leukemia. The room somehow got even quieter. I heard someone gasp. My mother was crying at our table, tears running down her face, and I realized I was crying too because I barely remembered my brother. I was only 3 when he died. My father kept talking, explaining that when they learned about Sable's diagnosis, it brought back all those hospital memories, all that fear and hope mixed together. He said watching another family go through the same fight made them want to help in any way they could. He said they understood the cost of treatment, the bills that pile up, the way medical debt can destroy a family even when you're trying to save your child's life. People in the audience were wiping their eyes. I saw Cain's mother at her table near the front with both hands covering her mouth. Then my father turned his whole body to face Cain directly. He said that a few days ago they learned something that made them question their choice to stay anonymous. He said they learned that the young woman who shaved her head to support Sable, who made that sacrifice without being asked, was treated with cruelty by someone in the family they were helping. His voice got harder when he said that learning how Cain treated me made them wonder if they wanted to keep supporting a family that raised someone capable of such meanness. Cain's face drained of every bit of color. His mouth opened like he wanted to say something, but nothing came out. His mother let out a loud gasp that echoed in the silent room. His father's head dropped down and he stared at the table. My father said they spent the last few days talking about whether to stop the funding. The room felt like it was holding its breath. Then he said that they decided they would absolutely keep paying for Sable's treatment because she deserves every possible chance at life, and she didn't do anything wrong. The relief on Sable's face made me start crying harder. But my father said they wanted everyone here tonight to know the truth about Cain's character, about what kind of person calls someone a freak for making a sacrifice. Cain tried to step forward and opened his mouth to speak, but my father held up one hand. He said he wasn't interested in hearing excuses or apologies designed for public consumption. He said real apologies happen in private, not on a stage in front of a crowd. Then he stepped away from the microphone and walked back to our table. The room exploded into whispers, people turning to each other and talking fast. Melody Stewart rushed onto the stage looking flustered and announced that dinner would be served shortly. I sat there shaking, my whole body trembling, because my father had just defended me in front of all these people, and I felt overwhelmed by it. Everyone was looking at our table now. Some people were crying, others looked angry. I could feel the weight of 200 pairs of eyes on me and my family. Cain stood alone on the stage for maybe 5 seconds before he basically ran off it and straight out of the ballroom. The doors slammed behind him. I looked over at his parents' table, and they were both sitting there like statues, completely frozen. His mother's face was wet with tears. His father hadn't moved at all. Sable leaned close to me and whispered that her parents had no idea about what Cain did until right now, that he told them we broke up for normal reasons. Her voice was quiet and sad. I felt this sharp pang of guilt in my chest, because Cain's parents had always been so nice to me, and now they were sitting there devastated because of their son's actions. Waiters started bringing out salads and people slowly began talking again, but the energy in the room had completely changed. During dinner, at least 10 different people came over to our table. They told my parents how generous and amazing they were. They told me how brave I was. They squeezed my shoulder or hugged me. But I couldn't taste any of the food on my plate. I just kept watching Cain's mother across the room, watching her cry quietly while his father sat there staring at his empty plate like he couldn't believe what just happened. Sable picked at her chicken, taking tiny bites. The chemo had killed most of her appetite weeks ago. I watched her push food around and I suddenly felt angry because this night was supposed to be about celebrating her, about raising money for her treatment. But instead, it had turned into this adult drama mess. She deserved better than this. After dinner ended and people started getting coffee and dessert, Cain's mother stood up from her table. Her eyes were red and puffy. She walked over to us and asked if she could speak with me privately. My mother looked at me and nodded, giving me this encouraging smile. So I followed Cain's mother to a quiet corner of the ballroom near the windows, where you could see the city lights outside. She immediately started apologizing, the words tumbling out fast. She said she had no idea Cain treated me that way. She said if she had known, she would have made him apologize immediately. Her hands were shaking. She explained that Cain told them we broke up because I wanted different things in life, that I was focusing on the school, and he was focusing on his career, and we just grew apart. That's what he said. She looked horrified as she talked, like she was realizing her son had lied to her face. I told her I wasn't angry at her or Cain's father. I said they had both been nothing but kind to me since the day we met. She started crying harder, these big tears running down her face, and she said she didn't know where she went wrong raising her son. She said she taught him to be kind and respectful, and she couldn't understand how he could do something so cruel. I found myself reaching out to hug her even though I was the one who got hurt. It felt weird comforting her, but I did it anyway. Standing there holding Cain's mother while she cried, I realized this whole situation wasn't just good people versus bad people like I wanted it to be. It was more complicated than that. Good parents can raise kids who make terrible choices. People who love each other can still hurt each other badly. She pulled back and wiped her eyes and told me that no matter what happens with Cain, no matter if he ever fixes himself or not, I would always be welcome in their home. She said Sable loves me like a sister, and that means I'm family now. She squeezed my hands and said, Family doesn't end just because a relationship does. I walked back to our table feeling weird and heavy. Sable looked up at me with those big eyes and asked if I was okay. I sat down and told her honestly that I felt strange about everything. I said I wanted Cain exposed, but now that it happened, I just felt tired. Like really tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. She nodded and said she got it. She told me that sometimes getting what you want doesn't feel the way you thought it would. We sat there quiet for a minute and I realized this 13-year-old kid understood things better than most adults I knew. The gala started wrapping up early. You could feel the awkward energy in the room, like everyone wanted to leave, but didn't know how to do it politely. People walked past Cain's family table and gave them these looks that were half sorry and half judging. His mother kept her head down. His father just stared at nothing. Groups of people whispered near the exit. I watched them leave in clusters, glancing back at us. My parents came over and said it was time to go. We walked to the car in silence. The drive home felt long, even though it was only 15 minutes. My father kept looking at me in the rearview mirror. Finally, he said he was sorry if he went too far tonight. I told him I was grateful even though my brain was still trying to process everything that happened. My mother reached back and squeezed my hand. They dropped me off at my apartment and I went inside alone. I changed into pajamas and got into bed, but I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the whole night. Cain's face when my father called him on stage. His mother crying. The room going silent during his speech. People avoiding him like he had something they could catch. I kept wondering if I did the right thing by going to the gala. If exposing him publicly was the right move, or if I should have just stayed away. My phone buzzed on my nightstand around midnight. It was a text from Sable that said, "Thank you for being real with me always." I stared at those words for a long time. Whatever else happened tonight, my friendship with her was real. That was worth protecting. I texted her back with a heart emoji and finally fell asleep around 2 in the morning. I woke up the next morning to my phone going crazy. 17 missed calls, dozens of texts. My heart started racing before I even looked at what they said. I opened my messages and saw links to a video. Someone had recorded my father's speech at the gala and posted it online. The video was already spreading fast. Hundreds of comments, thousands of views. People were talking about Cain's cruelty and my parents being generous and how awful the whole situation was. I felt sick. My private pain was now public entertainment. Strangers were commenting on my bald head and calling Cain names and praising my parents. It felt wrong even though they were on my side. I called Sable right away. She answered on the first ring and said her phone had been blowing up too. Kids from the school were messaging her about the video. She sounded tired. Really tired in a way that scared me because she needed to save her energy for treatment. I felt guilty that this drama was adding stress to her life when she already had enough to deal with. She told me not to worry about her, but I could hear in her voice that she was overwhelmed. We talked for a few minutes and then she said she needed to rest. I hung up and sat on my couch staring at my phone. The video kept getting more views, more comments, more shares. My doorbell rang around 10. It was my mother holding 2 cups of coffee. She came in and sat next to me on the couch. She took my phone and started reading the comments out loud. Some were supportive, saying I was brave and Cain was trash. Others called me an attention seeker who planned the whole thing for views. Those comments hurt, even though I knew they weren't true. My mother gently took my phone away after a few minutes. She reminded me that strangers' opinions don't matter. She said what matters is that I stood up for myself, that I didn't let Cain get away with treating me badly. I leaned against her shoulder and felt like a little kid again. 3 days went by. The video kept spreading, but I stopped checking it. I went to work and came home and tried to pretend everything was normal. Then on Thursday afternoon, someone knocked on my apartment door. I looked through the peephole and saw Cain standing there. He looked terrible. Dark circles under his eyes. Messy hair. Wrinkled shirt like he slept in it. I opened the door but didn't let him in. He immediately started talking fast, saying he was sorry, and he never meant for things to go this far. I stood in the doorway with my arms crossed. I told him his apologies meant nothing because he only cared now that he was facing social consequences. He tried to interrupt, but I kept talking. I said he had plenty of time to apologize after he dumped me, but he didn't. He only showed up now because everyone knew what he did. He looked down at his feet and admitted he panicked when I actually shaved my head. He said he thought I would back out at the last minute. That when he saw me bald, it made him realize how serious everything with Sable was. I felt anger rise up in my chest. I told him that was the most selfish thing I ever heard. That he used my sacrifice as a way to avoid dealing with his own fear about his sister being sick. He started crying right there on my doorstep, big tears running down his face. He said he knew he was a coward, that he hated himself for hurting me. But watching him cry, I felt nothing. These tears were about his guilt, not about my pain. I took a deep breath and told him I forgave him. Not because he deserved it, but because holding on to anger was too exhausting. But I also told him that forgiveness doesn't mean I want him in my life. He nodded and wiped his face and walked away. I closed the door and locked it. I called Sable right after he left. She picked up and I told her about Cain showing up. She made this annoyed sound and said he had been moping around their house acting like the victim. She sounded frustrated with her brother. I reminded her she didn't have to choose sides, that my relationship with her was separate from whatever mess existed with Cain. She said she knew, but it was hard watching him feel sorry for himself when he caused all of this. We talked for a while about other stuff. School and her treatment schedule and this new show she was watching. Normal things that had nothing to do with drama or videos or public fights. When we hung up, I felt better. lighter somehow. Like maybe things would be okay eventually. 2 weeks passed and I started feeling normal again. My phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon while I was making lunch. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. I answered and heard a woman introduce herself as Caroline Schwartz from the hospital social work department. She said Sable had requested that I be added to her approved visitor list for treatment appointments. I felt something warm spread through my chest hearing that Sable wanted me there during her chemo sessions. I told Caroline yes immediately without even thinking about it. This friendship with Sable had become something I couldn't imagine losing. After we hung up, I sat on my couch staring at my phone thinking about how weird life was. 3 months ago, I was dating Cain and barely knew his sister. Now he was gone and Sable felt like the most important person in my world. The following Thursday, I drove to the hospital for Sable's chemo appointment. I found her room on the 3rd floor and knocked softly before walking in. Sable sat in a big reclining chair with tubes connected to a port in her chest. She looked tired, but her face brightened when she saw me. I pulled up a plastic chair next to her and asked how she was feeling. She shrugged and said the medicine made her sleepy and nauseous, but it was bearable. We started talking about normal stuff, like the new album her favorite band just released and this book series she was reading about dragons. Cain's mother sat in the corner working on her laptop and she smiled at me when I came in. She got up after a while and offered to get us both drinks from the cafeteria. I said yes to coffee and Sable asked for apple juice. While her mom was gone, Sable told me about the kids at the school who were being nicer to her now. Some of them had seen the video from the gala and suddenly everyone wanted to be supportive. She rolled her eyes saying she wished people had been kind before her family drama went viral. I understood what she meant. People love a good story, but they forget real people are living it. The door opened and Dr. Boyer walked in carrying a tablet. He was younger than I expected with dark hair and glasses. He greeted Sable warmly and asked about her energy levels and appetite. She answered his questions while he typed notes on his tablet. Then he said something that made the whole room feel different. Her recent scans showed the tumors were responding to treatment. His voice was careful when he said it, like he didn't want to promise too much too soon. But Sable's whole face changed. Her eyes got wide and she looked at her mom who had just walked back in with our drinks. Cain's mother put her hand over her mouth and tears started running down her face. I reached over and squeezed Sable's hand. She squeezed back hard. Dr. Boyer explained that this was good news, but they needed to continue the current treatment plan. Sable nodded, but I could tell she wasn't really listening anymore. She was just happy. Actually happy. Not pretending or trying to stay positive. Real happiness that something was finally working. After the appointment ended, I offered to drive Sable home since her mom looked exhausted. Cain's mother thanked me and said she'd follow us in her car. Sable and I walked to my car in the parking garage. She moved slower than usual and I matched her pace. Once we were on the road, she asked me if my hair growing back felt weird. I glanced at my reflection in the rearview mirror. Short, fuzzy stubble covered my scalp now. I told her honestly that I wasn't in a rush for it to grow back. Being bald taught me something about not connecting my worth to how I looked. Sable was quiet for a minute. Then she said that was the kind of lesson she wished she could learn without cancer forcing it on her. I didn't know what to say to that. She was right. Nobody should have to get sick to figure out what matters. We drove the rest of the way listening to music and not talking. That night, I stood in my bathroom looking at myself in the mirror. Tiny hairs poked up from my scalp like grass starting to grow. I ran my hand over them, feeling the soft texture. The whole experience had changed me in ways I was still figuring out. I picked up my phone and took a selfie. I typed twins in a text to Sable and sent the picture. She responded within seconds with a laughing emoji and a heart. I smiled at my phone and felt grateful for this weird, unexpected friendship. My parents called the next day and invited me to dinner at their house. I drove over Saturday evening and found them both in the kitchen cooking. My mom hugged me and my dad kissed my forehead like he used to when I was little. We sat down to eat, and after a few minutes of small talk, my father said they wanted to explain something. He told me about my brother who died when I was 3 years old. I knew I had a brother who passed away, but my parents never talked about him much. My mom got up and brought back a photo album. She opened it to pictures of a little boy with a bald head and a big smile. She said his name was Michael and he had leukemia. I stared at the photos, seeing a kid who looked like me around the eyes. My dad explained that watching Michael go through treatment was the hardest thing they ever experienced. When he died, they didn't think they'd survive the grief. Learning about Sable's diagnosis brought everything back. They chose to help anonymously because they wanted to honor Michael's memory by giving another kid a fighting chance. My mother's voice shook when she said that helping Sable felt like a way to make Michael's suffering mean something. She said that every child who survives cancer carries forward the memory of kids like Michael who didn't make it. I started crying listening to them talk about my brother I barely remembered. My dad reached across the table and held my hand. He said that when I shaved my head for Sable, it reminded him of Michael's bravery. That's why seeing Cain treat me that way made him so angry. I understood now why my parents reacted so strongly at the gala. This wasn't just about me and Cain. It connected to their deepest pain and their greatest loss. I felt linked to my family's history in a way I never had before. We spent the rest of dinner looking at photos of Michael and sharing stories. My parents told me about his favorite toys and the jokes he used to make even when he felt terrible. I left their house that night feeling like I finally knew my whole family. A month went by and life settled into a new routine. I went to work and hung out with Sable and tried not to think about Cain. Then one afternoon I ran into him at the grocery store. I was reaching for cereal when I heard someone say my name. I turned and there he was standing in the aisle looking uncomfortable. He asked how I was doing. I said fine and asked about Sable. He said she was doing better and her treatment was going well. I nodded and said that was good. We stood there in awkward silence for a few seconds. He looked different somehow. Smaller maybe. Or just tired. He seemed genuinely humbled by everything that happened. But I didn't trust that his change was real or permanent. People don't transform overnight just because they face consequences. I told him I needed to finish shopping and he said okay. We both walked away in opposite directions. Later that day, my phone buzzed with a text from Sable. She said Cain asked her if I hated him. She told him that hate requires caring and I had simply moved on. I laughed out loud reading that. I texted back saying she was wise beyond her 13 years. She responded that cancer either makes you bitter or makes you real, and she was choosing real. I loved how direct she was. No sugarcoating or pretending. Just honest truth about how she saw the world. The following week, I started volunteering at the hospital's cancer support center. I filled out paperwork and went through orientation. They assigned me to help coordinate activities for young patients going through treatment. My first day, I helped set up an art room where kids could paint and draw. A mom approached me while I was organizing supplies. She thanked me for volunteering and said her daughter was terrified about losing her hair. Seeing me working there with my shaved head growing back gave her kid hope. I felt something click into place hearing that. This whole experience could actually help other people. I could turn what happened to me into something useful. Over the next few weeks, several parents told me similar things. They said their kids felt less alone knowing someone who looked like them was there. It felt good to matter in that way. To take my pain and make it count for something bigger than just my own story. During my next shift, I was organizing craft supplies in the activity room when a girl around 15 walked in with her mom. The girl wore a beanie pulled low and kept her eyes down. Her mom whispered something to me about her daughter just starting to lose hair from chemo. I walked over and introduced myself, and the girl looked up briefly before staring at the floor again. I pulled off my own beanie, showing my growing stubble. Her eyes widened. I sat down next to her and pulled out my phone, scrolling to pictures from the gala. I showed her the photo of me and Sable together, both of us bald and smiling. I told her about shaving my head and how scared I felt at first. The girl asked if kids stared at me. I said yes, but I learned that the people who mattered didn't care about hair. Her mom started crying quietly in the corner. The girl touched my head gently, feeling the short fuzz growing back. She asked if it hurt when it fell out. I told her the physical part was easy compared to the emotional part, but she'd get through it. We spent an hour talking about school and friends and normal teenage stuff. When she left, she hugged me tight and said she felt less alone. I watched her walk out with her shoulders a little straighter. 2 weeks later, Sable texted me that she had a scan appointment and asked if I could come. I met her family at the hospital and we sat in the waiting room while Sable got her imaging done. Cain's mother held her husband's hand, and I could see them both trying to stay calm. Sable came out 40 minutes later looking tired. We waited another hour for Dr. Boyer to review the results. When he finally called us into his office, I felt my stomach tighten. He pulled up the scans on his computer screen and started pointing at different areas. He said the tumors had shrunk even more than last time. He used words like significant improvement and positive response. Cain's mother grabbed my hand and squeezed it hard. The doctor said if this progress continued, they might be able to reduce the intensity of Sable's treatment in a few months. Sable started crying and her dad pulled her into a hug. We all sat there processing the news, afraid to get too excited but unable to hide our relief. Dr. Boyer reminded us that Sable still had a long road ahead, but this was definitely good news. On the way out of the hospital, Cain's mother called me while I was walking to my car. She invited me to dinner that Saturday to celebrate Sable's results. Saturday came and I drove to their house feeling nervous about seeing Cain again. I knocked on the door and Sable answered, immediately pulling me into a hug. She dragged me inside and I saw Cain standing in the kitchen looking uncomfortable. He gave me a small nod and I nodded back. Sable grabbed my hand and pulled me to the dining table, making me sit in the chair next to hers. Cain's mother brought out food, and his father opened a bottle of sparkling cider. The dinner was surprisingly normal. Everyone focused on Sable's good news and what it meant for her treatment plan. Cain's mother talked about maybe planning a small trip once Sable was strong enough. Sable mentioned wanting to try out for the school musical next year. Her father joked about her becoming a famous singer. Cain stayed quiet most of the meal but didn't create any drama. I found myself relaxing and actually enjoying the evening. Sable kept making jokes and her parents laughed more than I'd seen them laugh in months. The food was good and the conversation stayed light. Nobody brought up the gala or the breakup or any of the painful stuff from before. After we finished eating, Cain's father asked if he could talk to me privately. We walked out to the back porch and stood there looking at their yard. He thanked me for continuing to show up for Sable even after everything that happened with Cain. He said watching me be there for his daughter taught him something about real character. He told me he'd been thinking a lot about how he raised his kids and wondering where he went wrong with Cain. I started to say something, but he held up his hand. He said he wasn't making excuses for his son's behavior. He just wanted me to know that he saw what I did, and he was grateful. He apologized for not raising Cain to be a better man. I told him that Cain made his own choices, and that wasn't his father's fault. He looked at me with sad eyes and said, "Parents always wonder what they could have done differently." We stood there in silence for a minute before going back inside. Sable was showing her mother something on her phone, and they were both laughing. I drove home that night thinking about how weird and complicated families are. Good people can raise selfish kids. Bad situations can create unexpected connections. Forgiveness doesn't mean you have to let someone back into your life. I pulled into my driveway and sat in my car for a few minutes processing everything. My phone buzzed with a text from Sable. She wrote that I was basically her sister now and she hoped I was ready for that commitment. I smiled and texted back that I was definitely ready. She sent back a bunch of heart emojis and a gif of two people hugging. I went inside my apartment and looked in the mirror at my growing hair. It was still really short, but you could see the shape of a pixie cut starting to form. I took a selfie and posted it on social media without thinking too much about it. 3 months had passed since the gala. My hair had grown into a proper pixie cut that I actually loved way more than my long hair. It was easy to style and made me feel confident in a way I hadn't expected. I checked my social media and saw that Sable had commented on my selfie from months ago. She wrote that we were still twins in spirit with a bunch of heart emojis. I smiled, knowing our bond wasn't about matching appearances anymore. It was about something deeper that had nothing to do with hair or cancer or Cain. I commented back with hearts, and she immediately replied asking if I was free next week. She said her school was having a spring concert and she was singing in the choir. She wanted me to come watch her perform. I told her I wouldn't miss it for anything. The night of the concert, I arrived at the school auditorium and found Sable's parents in the 3rd row. They waved me over and I sat down next to them. The auditorium filled up with families and students. I looked around and spotted Cain sitting by himself near the back. He saw me and gave a small wave. I waved back but didn't go over to talk to him. The lights dimmed and the choir walked onto the stage. Sable stood in the 2nd row wearing a black dress with her hair growing back in patches. She looked confident and happy. The choir started singing and I watched Sable's face light up. Her voice blended with the others and I felt proud seeing her up there doing something normal after everything she'd been through. Halfway through the concert, Sable had a solo part. She stepped forward and sang alone for about 30 seconds. Her voice was clear and strong. I glanced back and saw Cain wiping tears from his eyes. Sable's mother reached over and squeezed my hand. When the concert ended, everyone stood up and clapped. Sable beamed from the stage. After the concert, we waited in the lobby for Sable to come out. Kids streamed past us, talking and laughing. Sable finally appeared with a group of her friends. She ran over and hugged her parents first, then me. She turned to her friends and introduced me as her sister. Not her brother's ex-girlfriend, just her sister. Her friends smiled at me, and one girl said she'd heard all about me. Another friend said what I did was really amazing. A third girl asked if she could take a selfie with both of us. We posed together and she posted it immediately. Sable's friends asked me questions about college and volunteering at the hospital. I felt genuinely accepted by these teenagers in a way that surprised me. They treated me like I was part of Sable's life naturally. Sable's parents stood nearby talking to other parents. Cain had left already without saying goodbye to anyone. Sable grabbed my arm and said her friends wanted to get ice cream and asked if I could come. I looked at her parents and they nodded encouragingly. A week later, I got a call from the hospital. Dr. Boyer wanted to schedule a family meeting to discuss Sable's treatment plan going forward. Sable had added me to her visitor list months ago, so they called me directly. I told them I'd be there and marked it on my calendar. The day of the meeting, I arrived at the hospital and found Sable's whole family already in Dr. Boyer's office. Sable patted the chair next to her and I sat down. Cain was there too, sitting in the corner looking serious. Dr. Boyer pulled up Sable's latest scans on his computer. He pointed at different images and explained what we were seeing. He said Sable's tumors had shrunk significantly over the past several months. The treatment was working better than they'd initially hoped. He used the word cautiously optimistic. He said Sable would still need maintenance treatment for at least another year, but the intense chemo sessions could be reduced. Sable could start living a more normal life. She could go back to the school full-time. She could participate in activities without worrying as much about her immune system. Sable's mother started crying. Her father put his arm around her and his eyes filled with tears too. I felt my own eyes getting wet because this girl had become so important to me. Seeing her parents break down with relief made everything feel real. Sable reached over and held my hand. Dr. Boyer gave the family a minute to process the news. Cain sat quietly in his corner, but I could see genuine happiness on his face for his sister. Whatever else he was, he did love Sable deeply. That much was obvious. The doctor continued explaining the maintenance plan and what it would look like. Fewer hospital visits, less intense medication, regular monitoring to make sure the cancer stayed away. Sable asked questions about her hair growing back fully, and when she could stop wearing hats. Dr. Boyer smiled and said her hair would continue growing, and she'd probably have a full head of hair within 6 months. Sable's mother hugged me and thanked me for being there. Her father shook my hand firmly. We all left the office feeling lighter than we had in months. That evening, Sable's mother called me while I was driving home from the hospital. She asked if I could help plan Sable's 14th birthday party next month. I said yes immediately. She told me she wanted it to be a happy celebration focused on Sable's progress. No fundraiser stuff. No drama like last year's birthday at the restaurant. Just a normal party for a normal teenager. I could hear the hope in her voice when she said normal. Over the next few days, Sable and I texted constantly about party ideas. She sent me Pinterest boards with decorations. I sent her pictures of different cake designs. We spent hours on FaceTime planning every detail. She told me she wanted something small at their house. Just close friends and family. She said she was tired of being Sable the cancer patient. She wanted to be a regular teenager celebrating another year of life. I understood that completely. We decided on pizza, video games, and a simple cake. Nothing fancy or medical related. The week before the party, my parents called and asked if they could meet Sable properly. They said they'd been funding her treatment for months but hadn't actually spent time with her. I thought that was a great idea. I texted Sable and her parents to arrange a dinner at a nice restaurant downtown. Sable was excited and nervous at the same time. She kept asking me what my parents were like and if they'd think she was weird. I told her they'd love her. The night of the dinner, I picked up Sable and drove her to the restaurant. She wore a cute dress and a colorful headscarf. She looked happy and healthy despite everything. My parents were already seated when we arrived. My mom stood up and hugged Sable immediately. My dad shook her hand with a warm smile. We all sat down and looked at menus. Sable ordered the biggest steak they had. My dad laughed and said he liked her style. She started telling stories about the terrible hospital food, how the jello was always weird colors, how the chicken tasted like rubber. My parents were cracking up. She had them completely charmed within 10 minutes. After we ordered, my parents got more serious. My dad told Sable about my older brother who died from leukemia when I was 3. Sable's smile faded and she listened carefully. My mom explained why they chose to help her family. She said watching another family fight cancer made them want to help however they could. Sable's eyes filled with tears. She reached across the table and held my mom's hand. She said she would honor my brother's memory by living her life fully. My mother started crying too. I sat there watching 3 generations of cancer experience connect in that moment. My dad had to look away and wipe his eyes. The waiter came with our food and the mood lifted a bit. We ate and talked about happier things. Sable asked my parents about my brother, what he was like, what he enjoyed doing. They told her stories I'd never heard before, about how he loved dinosaurs and building forts, how he was brave during his treatment. Sable said she wished she could have met him. The dinner ended with hugs and my parents promising to come to Sable's birthday party. Saturday arrived and I drove to Sable's house early to help set up. Her mom had ordered pizza. Her dad was setting up the TV for video games. I brought the cake I'd picked up that morning. It was decorated with music notes since Sable loved singing. Simple but perfect. Sable's school friends started arriving around 2. About 8 kids total. They were loud and excited and treated Sable like any other teenager. No awkward looks at her headscarf. No careful handling. Just normal friendship. They played video games in the living room while the adults hung out in the kitchen. I floated between both groups. Sable kept pulling me over to introduce me to different friends. She called me her sister every time. Not her brother's ex. Not the girl who shaved her head. Just her sister. When it was time for cake, everyone gathered in the dining room. I lit the candles while her mom dimmed the lights. We sang happy birthday. Sable closed her eyes and made a wish before blowing out all 14 candles. The look of pure joy on her face made everything worth it. All the drama with Cain, the public confrontation at the gala, everything. After cake, the party continued with more games and music. I was helping clean up plates in the kitchen when Cain appeared next to me. He asked if we could talk outside. I felt my stomach tighten but agreed. We walked out to the backyard where it was quiet. He told me he'd been in therapy for the past few months, working on understanding why he reacted the way he did when I shaved my head. He said his therapist helped him see that he used cruelty to push away his fear about losing Sable, that seeing me bald made everything too real. I listened without interrupting. He said he was learning to deal with his emotions in healthier ways. I told him I appreciated that he was working on himself, that therapy was a good thing, but I wasn't interested in rebuilding any kind of relationship beyond being cordial for Sable's sake. He nodded slowly. He said he understood, that he didn't deserve my forgiveness, but wanted me to know he was genuinely trying to be better. I told him being better was something he should do for himself and his family, not for me. We walked back inside and the party continued. A week after the party, I was at work when Sable's mom called. Her voice was shaking. She said Sable had a high fever and they were taking her to the emergency room. I told my boss I had to leave and drove straight to the hospital. I found the whole family in the waiting room. Cain's dad was pacing. His mom sat with her head in her hands. Cain stood against the wall looking pale. I sat down next to Sable's mom and she grabbed my hand. She said they were running tests to figure out what was causing the fever, that with Sable's compromised immune system, any infection could be dangerous. We waited for 2 hours. Finally, Dr. Boyer came out and said it was a common infection, easily treated with antibiotics. Nothing to panic about. Everyone exhaled with relief. Sable's dad put his arm around his wife, but Dr. Boyer reminded us that Sable's fight wasn't over, that these scares would probably happen again, that we needed to stay alert but not live in constant fear. They moved Sable to a regular room and said she'd need to stay overnight for monitoring. I followed the family upstairs. Sable was already asleep when we got there. The antibiotics and stress had worn her out. I sat in the chair next to her bed. Cain's mother came in with 2 cups of coffee from the cafeteria. She handed me one and sat in the other chair. She said having me in Sable's life gave her daughter someone to look up to. Someone who wasn't defined by being a patient or a family member. She said I brought normalcy that Sable desperately needed. I didn't know what to say, so I just thanked her. We sat there drinking coffee and watching Sable sleep. About an hour later, Sable's eyes opened. She looked around confused for a second, then saw us. She made a joke about how she couldn't even get a regular fever without everyone freaking out. I laughed at her dark humor. She said having cancer taught her to appreciate boring normal days, that she couldn't wait until her life was boring again. I told her boring sounded pretty good to me too. The next morning, Dr. Boyer came in with Sable's discharge papers and said she could go home as long as she took her antibiotics and rested. Sable's mom asked if they should cancel their beach house rental and the doctor shook his head. He said getting away as a family would be good for everyone once Sable built her strength back up. Sable's face lit up, and she turned to me asking if I could come too. Her parents looked at each other, and her dad smiled, saying I was part of the family now. I felt something warm spread through my chest hearing those words. A month later, I drove down to the beach house with a bag full of sunscreen and books. The house sat right on the sand with big windows facing the ocean. Sable ran out to greet me even though her mom yelled at her to slow down. We spent that first afternoon building a sandcastle that kept getting destroyed by waves. Cain was there, but he mostly stayed on the porch reading or helping his dad with the grill. I noticed he brought Sable her medication without being asked, and he actually listened when she talked about her day. He wasn't the same person who slammed a door in my face. On the third evening, Sable and I walked along the water while the sun turned everything orange and pink. She told me she wanted to become a doctor who works with cancer patients. I asked her why, and she said because she knows what it feels like to be scared and alone in a hospital room. She said she wants to be the kind of doctor who remembers that patients are people, not just cases. I told her she would be amazing at it because she understood things that can't be taught in medical school. She kicked at the foam from a wave and said she hoped she lived long enough to make it happen. I grabbed her hand and told her she would. The last night we had a bonfire on the beach, and Sable's dad stood up with his beer. He said this year had been the hardest of their lives, but they weren't alone. He talked about my parents paying for treatment and about my friendship with Sable. He said family isn't always about blood, and sometimes the people who show up for you matter more than the ones who are supposed to. I felt tears on my cheeks, and Sable leaned against my shoulder. When I got back home, I had 2 weeks before my senior year started. I sat in my advisor's office and told her I wanted to change my major to social work, with a focus on medical family support. She asked what made me interested in that field, and I told her about Sable, about watching a family navigate the worst thing that could happen to them. She smiled and printed out the paperwork. Sable started 8th grade the same week with soft patches of hair growing back in. She sent me selfies every single day with captions like, "Hair update, still looking like a baby bird," and "My head is fuzzy like a peach." I sent her pictures of my pixie cut growing out, and we made plans for a hair party once we both had long hair again. 4 months after the gala, my parents hosted a dinner party and invited Sable's family. I helped my mom set the table and watched through the window as both families arrived. My dad and Sable's dad stood in the backyard talking for over an hour. Later, Sable's dad told mine that the anonymous support didn't just save Sable's life, but kept their whole family from falling apart. My mom reached over and squeezed his hand. During dinner, Cain asked if he could talk to me privately. We went out to the front porch and he told me he got a job offer in another city. He said he thought the distance would be good for everyone. I agreed and told him I hoped he became the person he was trying to be. He nodded and said he hoped so too. Then he went back inside and I stood there for a minute looking at the stars. 2 weeks later, Sable's mom called me crying. I thought something was wrong, but she was crying happy tears. Sable's 6-month scans showed the tumors had shrunk even more. Dr. Boyer said if this kept up, she would be in remission within a year. I drove over to their house and Sable threw her arms around me. Her hair was growing back curly when it used to be straight, and mine was doing the same thing. We laughed about how we both literally became different people. The following week, I went with Sable to what might be her last intensive chemo treatment. We sat in the treatment room with matching short hair and took a selfie together. She posted it with the caption, "My person," and tagged me. I stared at that photo for a long time after she posted it. This friendship that started from such a painful situation had become one of the most important relationships in my life. Sable reached over and held my hand while the medication dripped into her port. She said she was glad Cain was an idiot because otherwise we never would have become friends. I laughed and told her that was the only good thing he ever did for either of us. 2 months later, my parents called me to their house and told me they were starting a scholarship fund in my brother's name to help families dealing with childhood cancer costs. They wanted Sable to be part of the first award ceremony and asked if I would help coordinate it. I spent the next 3 weeks helping plan the event at a local community center, where 50 people gathered to watch my parents present the first scholarship check to a family whose daughter was going through treatment. Sable stood at the microphone in a navy dress with her hair growing back in patches and talked about how support during treatment meant everything. She said that having people show up for you when you felt alone made the difference between giving up and keeping going. Her voice cracked when she mentioned me shaving my head and how that single act of solidarity gave her strength on her hardest days. I watched from the audience as people wiped tears from their eyes, and I felt proud of this kid who turned her pain into something that could help others. After the ceremony ended, Sable ran over and hugged me tight while my parents stood nearby smiling at us. Thanksgiving came 3 weeks later, and Sable's mom called to invite me to their family dinner. I showed up with pumpkin pie and sat at their table surrounded by aunts and uncles and cousins who all knew my story by now. Cain's empty chair sat in the corner of the dining room, and nobody mentioned him until Sable's dad said quietly that Cain had moved to another city for work, and the distance felt healthy for everyone. Sable's mom reached over and squeezed my hand during grace, and I realized these people had become my chosen family, in a way that felt more real than some blood relationships. We ate turkey and stuffing and laughed at Sable's terrible jokes, and I felt genuinely happy sitting there. Early December arrived cold and gray, and I drove to the hospital for what Dr. Boyer said would be Sable's final intensive chemo treatment. I brought cupcakes and walked into the treatment room where Sable sat in the big chair with her port already accessed. The nurses gathered around when Dr. Boyer came in and explained that Sable would continue maintenance treatment for several more months, But the worst of it was behind her. Sable's face lit up with relief and hope, and she grabbed my hand while her parents cried happy tears in the corner. We ate cupcakes right there in the treatment room, and the nurses cheered and took pictures with us. I looked at Sable with her patchy hair growing back and her bright smile, and I thought about how far she had come from that sad girl at the seafood restaurant 7 months ago. On a freezing January morning, Sable texted asking if I wanted to meet for coffee at the shop near her school. I walked in and saw her sitting at a corner table with a knit hat covering her head, and when she pulled it off, I noticed her hair growing back curly and wild when it used to hang straight. I touched my own head where my pixie cut had grown into soft curls that surprised me every time I looked in the mirror. We both started laughing about how we literally became different people through this whole thing. Sable stirred her hot chocolate and said that even though cancer sucked, she was grateful it brought us together. I looked at this brave, funny, wise teenager who called me her sister, and I realized that sometimes the worst situations create the most beautiful connections. My shaved head was not a sacrifice at all, but the beginning of finding my real family.